It is impossible to be self-sufficient without adapting and without change. Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. Now in permaculture, there is no such thing as a finished garden. A garden, a space, a project or farm grows and adapts and changes over time in the same way that we do. And I think that's really important. And this video is highlighting probably the skill that isn't talked about enough when it comes to self-sufficiency and creating a garden that feeds us but also works with nature, and that is how important it is to adapt, and this is what this video is going to dive into. One of the principles in permaculture is the idea of designing from patterns to detail, and we can kind of take this idea and apply it to a garden. So within a garden, our goal is a pattern and the detail is all of the actions that we take towards that goal. I think it was Albert Einstein who said that the eighth wonder of the world was compound interest, and that is the idea of investing. But I think the exact same thing applies to a garden. The more that we invest, the little things that we do, the little decisions that we make, the little actions that we take, the more that that compounds over time. And I think the power of compounding, or the idea of marginal gains, means that we can actually achieve so much more than we initially thought. One of my favourite little sayings that I've heard over the years is, as humans, we very much overestimate what we can do in a day, but we very much underestimate the kind of things that we can achieve over a year and onwards, and the same applies to gardening. As a self-identified realistic optimist, permaculture works for me so well because for me, it's about seeking opportunities. There's always going to be setbacks and failures and problems that happen in the garden. Whenever that happens, I see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to find a solution and to adapt. And I think adaptation and the idea of it can be a little bit frightening. So the slightly scary thing about adaptation is that it's a synonym of change. And change is a little bit of a scary thing. What I want to say is, if you approach something from a permaculture mindset, there's really no such thing as adaptation or change, because with a permaculture mindset, that is built into it. It is a technique for thinking outside the box. It's about finding solutions. And so if you're thinking about it from a permaculture perspective, things are a lot less scary. As a human, I am a human. I'm a very stubborn person. I'm very, very stubborn. I'm set in my ways, but I keep listening. We're given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. One of my favourite quotes. And it's the listening part that is so important, because I am very stubborn until someone gives me evidence to prove otherwise. I'm very firm in my beliefs, and then if I see the evidence for something that challenges that and I can't actually come up with a coherent argument, I'm like, yeah, you won. I believe that and I will change. It's the exact same thing in the garden. There might be certain things that are happening that you're thinking, oh, it's kind of working, you know, I don't really want to change, and then it keeps on going away, and then you think, oh, if I make this one thing, suddenly it makes it easier. The most important lesson I've realised is any change I've made in the garden, I don't think there's one thing that I regret. It's always seemed to turn out better. Like, it can be as simple as going from using one pen for marking labels to finding a different one that works much better, and I'll never ever use this pen again, and that's fine. I don't regret that. I don't miss that other pen. It's on the floor. And what I find is that sometimes the smallest changes make the biggest difference, and what I really like to focus on is trying to grow different varieties and to find varieties that make a difference when it comes to productivity. And so one of my changes recently is that my new default variety for salad potatoes is now Charlottes, because I adore Charlottes and they are very productive. But adaptation can be pretty big. This used to be dedicated to annuals. It used to have raised beds in it, and I've just decided to turn it into an undercover fruit forest. I also forgot that this used to have chickens in it as well, so it's stacking functions. Very permaculture. We should play bingo. It is impossible to be self-sufficient without change or adaptation. I think change and adaptation builds strength, it builds resilience, it forces us to become resilient. And on the theme of resilience, I'm trying to make this site off-grid in terms of water, electricity and compost. And so I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour to show you some of the changes that have been made just in the last few months towards building the resilience of this site and reducing external dependence. I get very excited about earthworks, and a colleague Claire has been very busy digging some new pipelines because we're completely changing our water infrastructure for the better. The reason why I like adaptation and change so much is that I only really do it to reduce friction. So an example here is that from our future pump, we had this big kind of pipe, and there was just one pipe, and so we're kind of moving this massive snake around different parts of the garden purely for the sake of filling up water, because our only real water supply is at the base of the garden. That takes up a lot of time. If I wanted to fill up the IBC tank in the garden, in the kitchen garden, I'd have to then walk it all around and it'd be a right pain. And sometimes I just couldn't be bothered. And then what suffers as a result? Well, my tomatoes and the plants that actually need watering. So to combat that, by installing 2 pipelines, it means that there's no longer having to lug around this. It makes it much easier. It's reduced the friction. It's reduced the thing that was holding back kind of success or holding back productivity. So as you can tell, this is working very effectively. To help me with installing the pipeline and a lot of the jobs around here, I use this really clever tool called Moja. So if you're a landscape designer, a builder, carpenter, anything like that where you have to do measurements, then you want to know about this. If you are not, just skip to this timestamp where the video will continue. At the start of this year, I learnt about Moja. I visited their HQ and got trained up, and what it is this fantastic device for measuring. It measures all sorts of different things. Length, volume, gradient, perimeter and area. For the pipe project, I used the Moja to work out total elevation, not just to the floor, but up to the top here, to make sure that the pump would be able to generate enough lift. And I knew it worked before, but I just wanted to make sure to see how much further I could go up the hill. And I also used it to work out the total length, so I could order the right amount of pipe and not over order or under order. And the final thing was actually working out how much grass seed that I need in area size for reseeding the areas that have been dug. The most important thing is that it saves you a huge amount of time. I love it as well because you don't need any phone signal. I have no phone signal here, it just connects with Bluetooth. So if you want to find out more about Moja, there's a link down below. There's also a little code for you that you can use as well. And as soon as you start using it, you're going to realise just how useful it is. Another slight adaptation I made was to put up a wall-mounted hose box and to just install soaker hoses for all of the polytunnels, just to make watering a lot more simple. And here what I've done, because I'm growing more perennials within the kitchen garden, I've gone down to 1 hotbed. This has opened up a new growing space. Here there were 3 compost bins. What I've done is I've actually moved them down here to just 2 compost bins. So I've managed to increase the growing area by increasing the perennials, and it's still going to produce all the compost I need because the worm bin is helping as well. Another change is that this shaded area under here was compost, and compost is, you know, a great thing to put in a shady area. But because this was where the Wi-Fi garden was, and you can kind of get a little clue because of all the Jerusalem artichokes, we've now got the chickens in there. And so all of the compost is happening in there. I didn't need to make compost here anymore. So we took down the compost bins, and then I put in these 2 IBC tanks instead. So this is still staying a functional space by storing our water. So this area here used to have 4 IBC tanks. There's now 2 on the far end. What is happening is that all of our tools have been stored in polytunnels. Polytunnels are the most precious growing space that we have here in Wales. And so what we've done is that we removed the 2 IBC tanks, which are now in the shade, and built this nice little tool shed that is in a more kind of central location. And it has opened up the space to keep these tools and the roof as well. I'm still being able to use this to collect rainwater. I've been installing ever-edge tree rings to create tree guilds, just to make it look a little bit more interesting, but also increase the productivity. When we first came to the site, we weren't sure about rabbit pressure, and there's been no rabbit damage whatsoever. And so we've actually been taking down fences, which we can reuse the material, and replacing the fences with soft borders. Okay, yes, this is Rosa rugosa, so it's a little bit spiky, but the raspberries is another idea. And I mean soft as in, like, rather than a hard fence, just have something that is grown that is a perennial, and it's really starting to take shape. Over winter as well, to further reduce the dependence on compost, we've been very much upping the perennial game. And this is an example here. This is a crabapple that I've put here to add a bit more structure, but also I've chosen varieties that I can still eat, or that are at least very simple to harvest. They create slightly bigger crab apples. And crab apples are really useful pollinators for the general apples that I'm growing on this site as well. So again, stacking functions and creating more interest. This nice little opening area, I've decided it'll be perfect for seating. And so we've installed this bench, and then behind it we've added more perennials. We've actually removed some raised beds to put in some in-ground perennials. To move towards being completely off-grid, we've had to update our solar panel setup because the last one was like a flexible solar panel that blew off in a storm, and so we've made sure that we've got secure, rigid solar panels. On the terraces we've planted a bunch of apple trees because it is feeling really quite flat, and I want to make this space feel like really enclosed, and every corner you turn is something different to look at. And so the first step towards that is planting some trees just to get them ahead, to begin to establish and make this feel a little less like a big open field. So this autumn is going to have quite a big overhaul of the parking area, and as part of that I decided there's no point having the gin bar. We never really use it, to be honest, and that's fine. But what we've created instead is that we need a place to drop off material like wood chip or wood peelings from the local sawmill. And so I thought, well, we could actually utilise this slightly flat area to open up space in the car park to do some exciting things. This whole welcome area is going to be changing, but in the interim, I've added these whiskey barrels just to add a little bit of colour and a little bit of something. But what we've done behind is put a fence, because every kind of garden has a place where you need to put all of the slightly unsightly things. And so we've done that fence just so at least, even if it is temporary, at least when people are coming in, it just feels a little bit nicer. And this area used to be a series of 3 raised beds between these damson trees, but we've changed it into creating more of a linear food forest. The biggest adaptation I've had to make as a gardener, especially with trying to pursue self-sufficiency and with permaculture, is actually moving away from being exclusively no-dig. This video here explains why I take a slightly different approach. Just the idea is to minimally disturb the soil, but if I need to dig, I will. And there are many cases where I do, and hopefully that video clarifies it.